we give you all the glory. You are my rock, my strength and my trust. In you I live and move and have my being. You are my shelter, my peace and my shield. You are my everything. You are worthy to be praised. You are my rock, my strength and my trust. In you I live and move and have my being. You are my shelter, my peace and my shield. You are my everything. You are worthy to be praised. Sweet Jesus, beautiful King, no Father like you, no friend like you. Your love for me is everlasting. No one like you, no one like you. Sweet Jesus, beautiful King, there is no Father like you, no friend like you. Your love for me is everlasting. No one like you, no one like you. You are my rock, my strength, my trust. In you I live and move and have my being. You are my shelter, my peace and my shield. You are my everything. You are worthy to be praised. You are my rock, my strength, my trust. In you I live, I move. You are my shelter, my peace, my shield. You are everything. You are my everything. You are worthy to be sweet Jesus. You are beautiful King. There is no Father like you, no friend like you.
All right, so good afternoon, everyone. This is the day the Lord has made. We rejoice and be glad in it. I'm so glad that we're having this show today. This is the Season of Apologies Live program, and it's a Christian apology program where we talk about issues relating to Islam and the defense of the Christian faith. All right, so I'm so glad that we're doing what we're doing today again. This is a very beautiful Sunday, and again, we're going to be continuing on the topic of discussion that we'll be taking a look at for a while. And we're so glad to have Dr. J. Smith right in the studio today. But just as always, if you have not been following us for a while and you've been wondering who Dr. J. Smith is, I will be glad to actually introduce to you who Dr. J. Smith is. So let me just do that right away. All right. So Dr. J. Smith has been working with Muslims since 1981 and has been a missionary with the Brethren in Christ World Mission for over 30 years. He's an international teacher on Christian Muslim apologetics and polemics and world famous for a fury evangelism at the Speaker's Corners in Hyde Park, London. He has participated in over 90 formal public debates with Muslim polemicists. Dr. J. Smith has two master's degree in divinity, and that is from the Eastern Baptist Theological Seminary, and also Islamics, and that is from the Fuller Seminary. All right, and he has a PhD in apologetics and polemics from the Melbourne School of Theology. That's in Australia under the supervision of Dr. Peter Riedel. Dr. J. Smith traveled extensively teaching apologetics for those exploring ministries to Muslims, and engages the movers and thinkers of Islam on a weekly basis. He is the founder he's the founding member of the Hyde Park Christian Fellowship, a weekly evangelism ministry to Muslims in London places, and as well as a co-founder of founder Centers for Apologetics. All right. Also, Dr. J. Smith has debated Dawa preachers like Shabi Ali, Adnan Rashid, Yusuf Ismail, Khalil Meek, Raheem Green, and also the host of others. So, men and brethren, I'm so glad to bring to you today Dr. J. Smith. Dr. J. Smith, how are you doing today?
Well, good. Thank you for having me back on again.
You're welcome. Dr. J. Smith, I need to say this. Ever since we had the first two episodes, the part one and the part two of this presentation, just about last week when, because I saw that on Tuesday, if I'm not mistaken, you had a show with Robert Spencer, the release of his new book. And so I posted the book on my, yeah, there you go. I see you're going to bring the book all right now. Oh, yeah, that's it. Yeah, so I posted
this is the book that just came out on Tuesday. You need to get it. This is the new edition of the first edition that came out in 2012. This is the 2012 edition. Now this is the 2021. It's about 25% bigger, larger, has a lot new material. We did an interview on it last week on Fander Films. You can go up and see it for about a half an hour to introduce this. And already it's gone to number one on Amazon for all books on Muhammad. Already shot up within one day. It's number 5 or number 6 now in all books on Islam on Amazon. So this book is really shooting up because everybody's buying it. Everybody wants to read it because of this newest material, some of which I'm going to be introducing today.
Awesome. I'm so glad about that. Now, when I put out the book on my Facebook page and also on the Student of Apologetics on Facebook page, I got a lot of response from the Muslims. Some are not too happy about this. They are saying, why should we even question the historicity of Muhammad in the first place? Why some are talking about Robert Spencer, saying, hey, why should he even take anything serious from Robert Spencer? And then I have some of my Muslim friends also say, oh, come on, Dr. J. Smith, they were not going to take him serious and all that. Now, I know that it's something very sensitive, something very serious, because the truth of the matter is that it truly Muhammad does not exist. I mean, it's something unthinkable. All right. So there's been a lot of reaction from some of them. I can understand that. I just want you to know about that because I know you must have been getting some responses from some Muslims as well.
In response to that, and it's a perfectly legitimate response by Muslims. Why should we take Robert Spencer seriously? Why should we take Dr. J. Smith seriously? Since everybody knows Muhammad existed in the 7th century. All right. The response to that is prove it. Prove it. That's all. Just 2 words. That's all you have to do in response. Show me any reference to Muhammad, the Muhammad of the 9th and 10th century, the Muhammad of the traditions, the Muhammad who lived in Mecca. Show me any reference to a city called Mecca. Show me any reference to a people called Muslims. Show me any reference to a religion called Islam. And show me any reference to a book called the Quran in the 7th century. Those are the 5 things you need to respond with. That's all we're asking. We're asking Muslims, if you really believe he did live in the 7th century and he lived in Mecca and he did the things you said he did there in the traditions, then prove it. That's all we're asking. So this is not a Islamophobic question. This is not a hate preaching. We're not doing any of the kind. We're asking a perfectly historical question. Legitimate question that needs to be asked of any religion that claims to make historical claims, as Islam does. And Islam is the first to say that Muhammad lived in Mecca, that he grew up there from 570 to 622, then moved to Medina. And from that time, the last 10 years of his life, he lived in Medina. And he did all the things they say he did. Prove it. That's all we're asking, because what we're showing is just the opposite. And today, I'm going to really hammer Mecca, because today we're going to confront Mecca. Did Mecca ever exist? That's what we're going to use, and that's what we're going to show, because no Muslim has been able to find any reference for a city called Mecca at all until 741. Muhammad died in 632. There's the problem.
Wow, that's a very serious one. And so, Dr. J, because of our time, I'm going to be just giving it to you right now. I'm going to give the space to you so you can start your presentation right away. So I think you can share you can share your screen so we can get some
quick introduction before we share a screen. So here's the problem. Now, the last 2 weeks that we've been doing these talks, the first week we talked about this real problem. Everything that Muslims know about, everything they're dependent on, everything that their religion is based on comes not from the 7th century when it took place, supposedly. It comes from the 9th and 10th century. That's 200 to 240 years too late. And what's more, all the writers who wrote in the 9th and 10th century, none of them lived in Mecca and Medina. None of them lived down where Muhammad certainly lived. They never knew Muhammad. They never were in the same area. They were working up in Baghdad, which is hundreds of miles away and hundreds of years later. That's the problem. And what's more, the things that they said about Muhammad, all the stories surrounding his life, just do not make sense. They don't fit the Hijaz. Now, the Hijaz is that central part of Arabia where Mecca and Medina are located. And these stories that you see in the traditions don't fit that far south. They don't fit anywhere near what Muslims are telling us all these events took place. None of the references really fit down there for one very good reason. And I'll be getting into that today. There's no vegetation down there. There's no water down there. And that's why, since there's no water, no vegetation, there's no civilizations, we can't find any reference to any large civilizations or these cities that are referred to. And what's interesting is that almost everything we do find references for, we can find, but not down there. We find them in places like Jordan and in Syria and in now Jerusalem. And that's just been coming out in the last 3 to 4 weeks, the last month. So this is all new material that's come out in the last month on almost everything we're finding can be traced to antecedent areas, antecedent people, and antecedent events. Now, let's get into the PowerPoint, because what we want to do today is we want to talk about pre-7th century, because if we're going to talk about the 7th century, you need to first start with that which leads up to the 7th century. So let's open up my PowerPoint and let's go ahead and I'll share my screen with you. And while I'm sharing the screen, I'll go ahead and select the window. That's what I want. And I understand that with StreamYard, I can only show it to you in outline form. Unfortunately, I cannot do the animations on StreamYard. It doesn't allow me to do that. That's why I prefer Zoom. So let's go ahead and start. Here you have the Islamic origins, or you might say pre-Islamic origins. So pre-7th century. And when we look at the pre-7th century, we want to ask the question that's right under it. What then really happened? Because obviously, this is a historical question. We need to find historical responses. So let's start with Mecca. Mecca is the problem place. This is where we need to ask the question: is Mecca at all? Did it exist? Is it there? Is it a city? Is it where Muhammad grew up? Now, according to the standard Islamic narrative, SIN, Mecca is right through it. You cannot read the standard Islamic narrative without finding Mecca. And so, though, Mecca is absolutely important to the whole tale, because as we're going to find out, Mecca is where Adam and Eve were thrown down to. It is where the Garden of Eden is. Look at chapter 7, verse 24. They're in up in the Garden of Eden in space. Remember, the Garden of Eden in the Quran is not on Earth. It's up in space.
Yeah.
They eat the fruit. They are confronted because of that. They're thrown out of the Garden of Eden. And where are they thrown to? Down to Mecca, according to the traditions, not to the Quran. The Quran doesn't say where at all. It just says they're thrown down to earth. Remember, the Quran itself only has one reference to Mecca in the entire book, and that's in chapter 48, verse 24. So what Muslims claim is that Adam and Eve were there, so it would be the first, what you want to say, the first inhabitant of mankind, right?
Yeah.
Also, in chapter 21, verse 51 to 71, it's where Abraham lived when he destroyed the idols within the Kaaba. So it was there in 1900 BC. It was the center of trade, north, south, east, and west. That we're going to get into that. That's called the trade route theory, promulgated by Montgomery Watt in the last century. So all these claims that Muslims make would suggest, therefore, it is the best known and best documented place on earth. It should be if it's the earliest. And if it's been around since the very beginning of time, it must be the oldest city. If it is the oldest city, someone somewhere should have known about it. Am I correct, Goredi?
That's true.
That's true. Okay, let's move on. Now, there are lots of inferences to Mecca, but remember, as I said earlier, there's only one reference in the Quran to Mecca, and that's in chapter 48, verse 24. With such an important city, why is it only mentioned once? Nonetheless, we can go to other references, like we can go to the traditions, and in this case, let's just go to the Quran that infers it, okay? So in chapter 3, verse 96, it infers that this first sanctuary, doesn't call it Mecca, appointed for mankind, was at Bakka. Is that Mecca? No, we're going to find out that that's a completely different word. In chapter 6, verse 92, in chapter 42, verse 7, it says that it is the mother of settlements. Now, it doesn't say Mecca. It says this mother of settlements that, of course, that Adam and Eve were supposedly sent down to. That's what it also is reflected in chapter 7, verse 24. It's the traditions that tell us that they were sent to Mecca, and the traditions don't come to the 9th and 10th century. So not the Quran. The Quran only says they were sent down to earth. In chapter 21, verse 51 to 71, Abraham goes into the Kaaba. Well, where's the Kaaba today? It's in Mecca. So all the Muslims assume, therefore, Abraham is in Mecca. And there he is in 1900 BC in Mecca. What's he doing in Mecca? I had no idea he was that far south. Not according to the Bible, not according to the history, not according to all the archaeological evidence. Everything we know from the Nuzi tablets to the Mari tablets place him way up in Canaan, place him in Ur to begin with, and coming over to Canaan. So nowhere is he ever near a place called Mecca, or even in the Central Arabia, or even Arabia. And then, of course, supposedly he was born there, is what the traditions tell us, and that all the Qiblas from 624 on are supposedly facing that city. In chapter 2, verse 149 to 150, we have the references that the Qibla was redirected from the farthest mosque to the Masjid al-Haram. It doesn't say Mecca, it just says Masjid al-Haram. Every Muslim believes that must be Mecca. The Masjid al-Haram, if you translate that, means the forbidden place of bowing. So it's what you bow towards. It's the Qibla, the direction of prayer is facing, according to chapter 2, facing Mecca. So one reference is all we have for this place itself. Now, when you go to Mecca, you will see, and here's another big problem. According to the Quran and according to the traditions now, wherever this place of the prophet, and that's usually the references given to the city, the place of the prophet, the place of, this is where the prophets lived. This is where Abraham lived. This is the settlement of the prophets, sometimes it's called. It's in a valley, and it has a parallel valley. Ibn Hisham talks about that. Al-Bukhari refers to that. It has a stream going through it. Al-Bukhari, who writes in the 9th century, he refers that this place. Now, of course, in the 9th century, it is called Mecca. So in the 9th century, in the traditions, the reference is very clear. It's Mecca. Because by that time, the Abbasids had now created Mecca. We're going to see that Mecca is really an Abbasid invention. The Abbasids don't come to power until 749. Muhammad died in 632. So it takes them 100 years to finally choose Mecca as their city and as their place. Then once they choose it, then once they have the Kaaba there, once they have all the sanctuary there, then of course they've got to place their prophet there. So it has a stream in it. It has outside it are ruins of pillar and salt. Even the story of Lot's wife is redirected down to Mecca in chapter 37, verse 133 to 138. It has fields there, according to Al-Bukhari. It has trees, grass, fruit, clay, loam, all these things that you would expect in a fertilized area, according to Sahih Tirmidhi, Al-Bukhari, and also Al-Tabari. So all of these references in the tradition suggest it's a very fertile place. It has olive trees. Now, this is problematic in and of itself, because we know that in the 7th century, there were no olive trees that far south. The only olive trees that existed in the 7th century and earlier were up in the Mediterranean, 600 miles further north. There were no olive trees that far south, not in Arabia, not in Arabia. So what are olive trees doing there in chapter 6, verse 141, in chapter 16, and in chapter 80 in the Quran itself? And then it has mountains overlooking the Kaaba, according to Ibn Hisham, al-Bukhari, and others. So this is obvious that this place that the Quran is talking about and that the traditions is talking about is a very fertile place with lots of water. And it has olive trees, grass, clay, loam, fruit, and also it has streams and waters going through it. Obviously, when you look at Mecca, look at even today, it's as arid a place as you can get. It is as dry. It was called Petraea Deserta for a reason. Petraea Deserta means the desert. And that is exactly what we find. And we're going to see that comes into more in play as we talk about it in this episode. Now, let's look at the maps. And the maps are the place that should show this place. If it is the oldest place in the history of mankind, if it's where Adam and Eve went to, then there should be on some map, right? Maps are great because maps show where places are. Maps show where cities are. Maps show where civilizations are. Well, let's see what the maps show. Now, this is from Ptolemy. Now, be careful, Correde. Ptolemy never drew this map, all right? I don't want anybody jumping all over me and getting all upset with me. But Ptolemy didn't draw anything because he never really, they didn't have cartographers back then. That was much too early. Cartography and the whole science of map making really came into existence in the 1400s. So this map you're looking at was created by a guy named Leonhard Holle in 1482. To reflect what Ptolemy wrote about. Ptolemy wrote about Arabia. He wrote about all of this coastal areas of Arabia. He never went inland at all. And so he just talked about the coastal areas. But Leonhard Holle then tried to put it together, and this is the map he wrote, or he created in the 15th century, redacting it back to the 2nd century, because Ptolemy was writing in the 2nd century. But you notice, even in the 2nd century, which is long before Islam ever existed, where's Mecca? Not on that map. Well, here's another map. This is another map, again, from Ptolemy's descriptions, put together in the 1500s, 1541, by a man named Laurent Fries. And you notice Mecca's not there as well. Didn't exist. Now, if this is the city that has been there since the time immemorial, the very first city in the history of mankind, and look at all those other cities you see on the map, where is Mecca? Why isn't Mecca there? Now, those aren't cities. Let me rephrase that. Very few of these. In fact, only the ones along the coast would be cities. All the other ones were just hamlets. Small little hamlets, because nobody lived. Hardly anybody lived. It was too much of a desert. Here's another one. This is from 1571 by Sebastian Münster, looking back at Ptolemy. So these are all guys in the 1400s and the 1500s who are reading Ptolemy and trying to put together maps about what they think Ptolemy is referring to. And you notice what's missing again. Mecca is missing.
Mecca.
It's right where the question mark should be. Where every time you see that red question mark, that's where it should be, and it isn't. So that's a real problem. Here's one from the 7th century. This one was supposedly created from the 7th century, but notice again, Mecca is missing. Not there. Nada. Completely gone. That's a problem. Now, here's another one that's redacted back to the 7th century. Now, not the 2nd century, but the 7th century, much, much later. And again, Mecca is not there. By the 7th century, it should be there. Wouldn't you think, correct?
Yeah, it should have been there. I mean, it should be existing by that time.
And this is when Muhammad lived. This is when he was born. He was born there in 570, according to what the traditions tell us. He moved from there in 622 up to Medina, according to what the traditions tell us. But there is no Mecca, even on the 7th century maps that are, again, these are facsimiles going back to the 7th century, what they thought existed. Now, why was Mecca so important? Well, this is what we know as the trade route theory, what they call the land trade route theory, which was promulgated and created first by a man named Montgomery Watt in the last century. And he is the one that really helped the Muslims out, because the fact that it's such a small place and there just was there's no reference to it. There's no map showing it. We can't find any writings about this place called Mecca. What he suggested was, nonetheless, it did exist, because of the movement of trade. What did he mean by that? Well, let's look at some maps here. And this is known as the Montgomery-Watt trade route theory. Now, notice all the trade came from China and from India. You see a bit of India there on the right side, the western coast of India, and you see the Arabian Sea. The trade could not go north because of all those mountains there. You see the mountains in the north? That's the Hindu Kush. That's the Himalaya mountains. So the trade could not go that direction. It had to come across from the west coast of India, what is today Gujarat, that little tail sticking out. They would put it on board ship, and the ships would go across the Arabian Sea, up over through the Persian Gulf, and over to what is today Basra. Now, Basra did not exist back then. It would be another name for another city. And then from there, they would take off all their goods, and then they would take them up and go across what is today Jordan, across what is today Syria, and what is today Israel, over to the Mediterranean coast. That was the trade that used to exist all the way up until about the 5th and 6th century. Around the 5th century, you had two great empires, the Byzantine Empire that you see there up on the top, and the Sasanian Empire that you see right there in what is today Iran and Iraq. The Sasanians were Persians, the Byzantines were Romans, and the Byzantines were Christians, the Sasanians were Zoroastrians. So you had two great empires. The Byzantine and the Sasanians, they were starting to battle each other. They were having war after war. For 200 years, they battled each other. Well, as they battled each other, that shut down that trade route. They couldn't go that way anymore. It was too dangerous. So the Persian Gulf got shut down because of the wars that were happening. So Montgomery-Watt says, well, because of the fact they couldn't go that route anymore, they went this route. There's the X now. They couldn't go through the Persian Gulf. I put an X there. So they had to go around the Persian Gulf. And what they did is they came down to Aden, and they went up to Aden, up to Mecca, and then from Mecca up to Gaza. Now, there were some cities in between. We know that the Sana, they would have gone to Najran, they would have gone to Taif, and then from Taif down to Mecca, and then up to Yathrib and Khaybar and Tabuk, and then on up to Gaza. So that would have been the trade route that he promulgated, that he suggested in the last century. And everybody gave him applause and clapped to say, yeah, you've solved the problem. So that's how Mecca became important, because all the trade went through Mecca. It controlled the trade, and that's why Mecca was such an important city. It controlled all the trade north-south. And of course, Montgomery-Watt added to that, why don't we say east and west as well? So yes, east and west as well, because it's coming from the east, it's coming from China, it's coming from India, and the west, it's going to Africa. So solve the problem. All the Muslims were happy. Everybody was happy until Patricia Corona. Now, remember, who is Patricia Corona? Well, we introduced her in the last talk, didn't we? She, in 1987, looked at this map. This map you're looking at right here is what people thought the 7th century looked like. Okay, so it is a 7th century map, though it's made in the 20th century. All right? Made in the 20th century, redacting it back to the 7th century. And this is what they felt. This is what they believed the 7th century looked like. So all the names you see there don't make sense. Look up there in Ctesiphon. What's Ctesiphon? Ctesiphon would be today Baghdad. All right? You don't see Basra there. You don't. You'll see Hira. But what's Hira? Hira is what today would be Kufa. Now, Damascus exists. That's true. Gaza is still there. Mecca, interestingly, this map says Mecca existed back in the 7th century. All right, Patricia Corona comes along. Now, this woman, head of department at Oxford University, had got her doctorate at School of Oriental and African Studies under Dr. John Wansborough in London. She looked at this map and she says, I see a problem here. Actually, she saw two problems. Let's take a look at them. So these are the two problems. First and foremost, she says, take a look. If you believe that the trade came across the Arabian Sea, was all taken off board there in Aden, went up to Taif, which is on the Western Plateau, through Najran, through Sana, through Najran, up to Taif, then look and see it takes a jog down to Mecca, because Mecca is not on the Western Plateau. It's about 1,000 meters off, way down. So you had to go down to Mecca, and then it had to go back up to get on the Western Plateau to get to Yathrib. And then from there, it went up to Khaybar, Tabuk, and then on up to Gaza. Look at that jog. Can you see it's a detour there? That's the first problem. But that's not the biggest problem. There's a much bigger problem than that. She says, hold on a minute. Everybody knows that when you do trade, the cheapest way to send any goods by anywhere, at any time, is by sea. That's why you take them off there, put them on boats there on the western coast of India, and you bring them across the Arabian Sea, and you hold on a minute. Why would you take off your goods in Aden? She said. When you have a seaway, a waterway called the Red Sea. Look at the Red Sea. Can you see the Red Sea there?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, can see that.
Because she found out if you take a ton of goods just 50 miles by land, it would cost the same amount as 1,250 miles by sea. Ooh, it would have been prohibitively expensive to take them off there in Aden and go up to Taif, down to Mecca, up to Yathrib, up and all the way to Gaza, 1,250 miles, when you could have just kept them on the boat. It would have been much cheaper. Well, listen, we do that today as well, don't we? All of our big goods, all of our oil that comes from all over the world, they take them on these tankers. Why? Because it's so much cheaper to stay on the water, because all you need, well, back then, all they needed was wind. If you're on land, you have to have camels. You have to feed them. You have to water them. In deserts, they're very difficult to find water. More than that, you have to pay at every place you go. You have to pay. You have to pay for room and board at every stop along the way. You have to worry about dacoits. You have to protect them. You have to secure them. So therefore, she said, that's why it was so expensive to go by land. Why in the world did they go by land? Now, remember, this lady, Dr. Patricia Caron, reads and writes 15 languages. Can you do that, Correde?
I told you I can barely do 2.
Okay, now she reads and writes 15 archaic languages, including Sumerian. She knows, Akkadian. She knows, Syriac and Nabatean and Nabatean Aramaic. She knew and could read and write these languages before Arabic even existed. These languages existed in that area. And so she went back and she looked at the trading documents. And this is what she found. There was no trade that went from Aden up to Taif, down to Mecca, up to Yathrib and Gaza. That was not anywhere on any of the trading documents. All of the trading documents were by sea. She went to the western coast of India and looked at the trading documents. There was no reference to any Arab names on any of them, for one very good reason. The Arabs were not interested in the sea. They were camel herders. They were nomadic. They lived in the deserts. They did not care about the sea. That's why there aren't hardly any coastal cities along the western coast of Arabia. There's only one called Yanbu. That's it. So all of the trade was by sea, across the Arabian Sea, over to Agilis. Look at Agilis there. That's on the African coast. That is in what is today Eritrea. Eritrea, which is having problems right now with Ethiopia. And then they would go up the Red Sea, and they would go to the Gulf of Aqaba, up the Gulf of Aqaba, and from there they would go to Petra, and from Petra they would go to Gaza, and they would branch out all over the Mediterranean world. That is what she found by looking at historical evidence, which is what you need to do. She just destroyed Montgomery Watt's theory. There was no trade through Mecca at all. That she just found out in 1987. So we're just talking about, well, goodness, we're just talking about 30 years ago she found that out. But hold on a minute. We've just learned something new concerning the Red Sea trade route. Notice which side of the Red Sea the green arrows go. You notice? Are you seeing that?
Yep.
What side do they go?
Through the sea.
Yeah, but what side of the Red Sea are they on? They're on the western side, right?
Yeah.
Notice the green arrows don't go on the eastern side. They go on the western side. So there could, and this was a comeback that came back to Dr. Patricia Corona. Well, what? Okay, so they didn't go by land because it was prohibitively expensive. They went to Jeddah. They went up the Red Sea to Jeddah. Jeddah, which exists today. Al-Fadi, my good friend, grew up in Jeddah. And that was the port that they went then from Jeddah right up to Mecca. And that's how Mecca became important, because of Jeddah. Is that so? Well, this is something that I just debunked this on a few months ago, because I had to go back and find out about the Red Sea. And what I found is there was no trade whatsoever along the Arabian coast. Why? Well, no one bothered to look at the history or the topography of the Red Sea until the last few months. Now, what do we know? According to the Islamic traditional view, this is the standard Islamic narrative. If you look at the tradition from the 9th and 10th century, they said, they were very clear that Yathrib, Yanbu, Mecca, and Jeddah were thriving towns. That trade was not only by land, but it was also by sea, through the Red Sea, via Jeddah and Yanbu, following the Arabian coast. So the two ports along the Arabian coast would be Yanbu in the north and Jeddah right there by Mecca. It's only about a 30 to 40-minute drive if you were to go there today between Jeddah and Mecca. So all the traditions are very clear that both the land route and the sea route existed. We've just destroyed the land route. What about the sea route? Let's destroy that. Okay, shall we?
Let's go.
Okay, now, according to the Islamic traditional narrative, according to what the traditions tell us from the 9th and 10th century, Alexander the Great in 328 BC went to Mecca via Jeddah. Now remember, these are 9th and 10th century writings about what Alexander the Great was doing in 300 BC. Hold on a minute. In the 9th and 10th century, Mecca and Jeddah did exist. But did they exist in 328 BC? Well, I went to Wikipedia and wanted to find out. So me being, the scholar that I am, I always go to Wikipedia first, which is the idiotic thing to do. And there in the Wikipedia, it said that Jeddah existed since the 2nd century BC. And I put that out there and I put up a video on it saying, yep, Jeddah existed and that could be how they went. Boy, did I get hammered by everybody. This is the great thing about YouTube. You put stuff up there and you get peer reviewed within seconds, if not minutes, if not hours. And I got slammed. How dare I look at Wikipedia? Did you look at the source for that? And I went back and looked at the source, and here it was 2 Muslim sources from the 15th century AD that were writing about it. That's 800 years after Muhammad existed. They were saying that Jeddah existed in the 2nd century BC. And I said, oh dear, I got hung out, and I realized I should be careful. You always be careful about Wikipedia. Look at your sources. So I went back and I got my team working for me, and my team said, Jay, why don't you go back to Dr. Hawting, Dr. Gerald Hawting, who is your professor at School of Oriental and African Studies. He is the world authority on the city of Jeddah. He's written a book on it. So I went back and I asked him to read it. We went back and found out that he was very clear. Jeddah did not exist until the 8th century AD. Let me repeat that. There was no Jeddah until Mecca was chosen. Once Mecca was chosen after 741 AD, they then needed a port to supply it. And that's why Jeddah was created. Jeddah is not even 1,300 years old.
Wow.
It is a very new city, including it's even newer than Mecca. So this whole reference of Alexander the Great going there is absolutely false, is absolutely hogwash. But then, of course, it's written in the 9th and 10th century. They didn't do their history very well back then. We do know about Alexander the Great. We do know that he had three expeditions from what is today Basra. Now, Basra did not exist back then. That is a modern-day map. We're looking at Basra on a modern-day map. That's from I got this from Google. And so he would come down from what is today Basra, down to Bahrain. That was the first expedition. A second expedition had him go out to the Gulf of Oman, and that's as far as he got. It was the third expedition, which is the most famous, because that one brought him right around, according to the traditions. It brought him all the way around, according to what the traditions tell us, to Aden, up through to Yanbu. But there was no reference in any of Alexander's, there's no reference in Alexander's biography of anybody stopping at a place called Jeddah, because Jeddah hadn't been created yet. Not in the 3rd century BC, but Yanbu did exist. Yanbu, because Yathrib existed, and Yanbu was the port for Yathrib. That it did exist, but that's much further north. And then they went on up to, they were trying to find a route to Egypt by sea so they could invade and conquer Egypt. And they were trying to see if they could do that. And they got up as far as the Gulf of Aqaba, and then they came back. And the reason they came back was because there was just no provisions. Well, the reason why is they were on the wrong coast. They were on the wrong coast. They were either they didn't know better, or they weren't told, or there was people that realized that they didn't want them to come there. They didn't tell them about the other coast. That's why they had to come back, and that's why Alexander the Great never attacked Egypt using the sea. He always went by land because of this expedition, this third expedition, which was a failure. Now, to understand what I'm going to say next, you're going to have to look at a topographical map. There's a topographical map right there, and you can see, looking down from space, you can see the water channels. Now, when you look at a topographical, and I got this from a guy named Chiara Zazzaro. I want to thank him. Back in 2013, he did this survey. When you look where the red line is, see where the red line is?
Yeah.
That is the deep channel, very deep channel. And if I took the red line out, you could see it, but I'm not permitted to do animation, so I can't show you animation here.
Yeah.
But that's the very deep channel. And that's where the big ships today go. But back in the 7th century and earlier, there were no big ships. They didn't have tankers. They didn't have these super tankers that we have today. They had much smaller ships, which were much more shallow and only needed shallow water. And what the sea lanes were back then were all where you see the golden arrows. See where the golden arrows go?
Mm-hmm.
What side of the sea, Red Sea, are they on?
For the golden, seems to be on the west.
That's right, on the African side. You notice?
Mm-hmm.
The eastern side, there are no shallow channels, and there were no boats that went up that way because there was no reason to go up there. And the reason why? Because the Arabian side had no water. If it had no water, it had no vegetation. If it had no vegetation, there's no reason to go there because you need water and vegetation in order to resupply your supplies, right?
Sure.
To go 1,250 miles, you can't do that in one day. It takes about 5 days to a week to do that. And that's why in these smaller boats, they had to have provisions along the way. They had to go to where the water was. So where was the water and where were the fertilization? Well, take a look at history. Let's see what history shows us. History shows us that there were 5 coastal cities along the Red Sea western coast. Asab, what is in Eritrea, and we find the history goes right back to 246 BC. Agilis in Eritrea also, that goes back to 79 AD. Suakin from the Sudan, that goes back to 170 AD. Berenice in Egypt, that goes to 275 BC. And Safaga in Egypt, that goes back to 282. Look and notice them, all those red circles, there are the names, and look at the dates. All of those dates predate Islam. Am I correct?
Mm-hmm. You're right. Yeah.
They're centuries before Islam, which means the trade was always along the African coast. Why not on the Arabian Sea? On the Red Sea's eastern Arabian coast, only Yanbu is known as Yathrid's port city. What about Jeddah as a port city? We have no history of either Jeddah or Mecca until the 8th century AD. The reason why? Because neither had water nor a population large enough to accommodate early trade. Now, without Mecca, what then happens to 7th century Islam? So we've destroyed Mecca both by land and by sea. There's no other way to get to Mecca except by land and by sea. Am I correct?
Mm-hmm.
Bingo. And that just happened 3 months ago. So on March 13th, a Wikipedia editor changed the wiki article on Jeddah on March 14th because he realized that everything that was written there, he first started with the Danish Wikipedia, and then he said a few days later that the English Wikipedia has now also changed on Jeddah. So even Wikipedia is changing it because of what I found back in March.
Wow.
Who says you can't change history? Yes, you can. Now, so we've debunked the trade routes. Now let's look into the early claims. These are the claims that Muslims make today, and you'll hear them for the fact that Mecca existed. Let's take a look. Now, the first one is Akatharchides. According to almost all the ones, the Muslims that I've come across, they say, yes, Mecca did exist. And it comes from this guy named Akatharchides in the 2nd century BC. And he's a historian writing in the 2nd century BC and refers to the temple for all Arabs. And he located that temple. Well, of course, it's called temple, but we know that that really means a mosque, because a mosque would be the Arabic equivalent to temple. So but here's the problem. He locates that temple 90 kilometers from the Tiran Island. Look where the Tiran Island is. It's right at the mouth of the Gulf of Aqaba. All right.
Mm.
So what is 90 kilometers away? Well, take a look. There is Wadi Ainuna. 90 kilometers away is Wadi Ainuna, is the location Akath argues would create. Why? Because Wadi Ainuna had a large temple. That is well known from all from Ptolemy talks about it, the others talk about it. There was a temple there at Wadi Ainuna. Is that Mecca? Could that be the Kaaba they're referring to? No. Take a look where Wadi Ainuna is. Look where Mecca is. There's 962 kilometers between the two.
Wow.
So it's way too far north. So throw out Akathargates. He was not talking about anything. He said Arabia, and that's why he was saying it was for all the Arabs could go to. But what does he mean? Because in the 2nd century, all the way up until the 2nd century AD, Arabia included that part of the world. See, this is what people don't realize. Whenever you look at any ancient documents, when they say Arabia, they're not talking about Saudi Arabia. They're talking about that part that's right there in the red rectangle. Do you see what I'm talking about? That was known as Arabia Petraea. And the only part of the civilized world the only part of Arabia that they knew about was what today would be parts of Jordan, parts of Syria, and parts of what is Israel, and parts of what is now today Egypt. That would be way in the north. The reason why they didn't know anything outside of that in the white area, because that was barbaric. There was no civilization there. There were hamlets of people, but nobody of importance, so they didn't even consider it part of the map. So whenever you have Agathargates or anybody talking about Arabia, they're talking about that place that's in the rectangle. So Agathargates' temple for all Arabs was Wadi Ainuna, not Mecca, because all the Arabs he knew lived in that part of the world, way up north and 960 kilometers away from Mecca. Now let's look at Pliny the Elder quoted Juba II, who was from Mauritania, a scholar from living in Rome, and he wrote about the Arabian Peninsula. And one of the places in Juba's description is a reference to this place called Dabanagiris Regio. Now, that would probably not mean much to you, but in 1970, a man named Hermann von Wissmann, a geographer, proposed that this was the territory belonging to the Quraysh, as well as Mecca and its environs. So he said this is now a reference to Mecca. However, Pliny was quoting Juba II, and you need to continue the quote. Don't just read Dabanogiris. You need to see where he placed it. He refers to the Arabian coast, but not the West Arabian coast. He talks about Kharax. Look where Kharax is. It's also another name for it. It's called Khaybar. It's in Iraq. It's very close to where Basra is. And then he says he comes down the Persian Gulf around Oman, dropping the name Damanogiris along the way. So Damanogiris would be somewhere on the eastern coast of Arabia, hundreds of miles away. You got the wrong coast. So you cannot say that's Mecca. It's too far away. And of course they knew that coast because that coast was well known. But nobody would have gone on the western coast because there was nothing there for them to go to. If they went the Red Sea, they would have gone up the African coast. Okay? Now the biggest one, and this is Makaraba. This is Ptolemy's Makaraba. Claudius Ptolemy, a Greek writer, geographer from Alexandria. He was living in Egypt, and he wrote the Guide to Geography, in which he designated many cities within Arabia for what people had come back and told him. In 1482, Leinhard Holy drew the map that you see there on the left, where he thought Ptolemy's cities were located. That is not a map by Ptolemy. As I said earlier, this is by Leinhard Holy. Describing what he thought, or picturing what he thought Ptolemy was saying. Now, in it, he gave coordinates for a place called Makoraba. See Makoraba there?
Yeah.
Okay, I've circled it in red. 73 degrees by 20 degrees by 22 degrees. Yet this puts Makoraba southeast of Yathrib. See where Yathrib is there? While present-day Mecca is to the southwest, where the star is.
Wow.
Placing Mecca too far to the east. So why do people think Makaraba is a reference to Mecca? First of all, look at the word. Makaraba means place of the Karib, if you know Arabic correctly. So it's even got the wrong radicals. It's the wrong letters. Now, Dan Gibson comes and he says, okay, he matches the towns and the cities with rivers which still exist today and overlaid them on a map at left. Unfortunately, this puts some of the cities into the Arabian Sea, which would not be exactly healthy for the inhabitants. So there was a problem here. And Dan said, listen, looking at a map and putting these places on a map today, most of the people would be underwater. They wouldn't live very long. So there is a problem with what Ptolemy's saying. And he found out what the difficulty was. He matched Ptolemy's rivers to the location of the rivers today to attain a correct map of Arabia. That's the one that is on the left. In doing so, it became apparent to Gibson that Ptolemy and also subsequently Hole were not aware of the vastness of the deserts of Arabia's interior, because no one ever traveled through those interiors. None of the Europeans traveled that far, and certainly Ptolemy didn't travel that far because there was nothing there to travel. They didn't realize how large they were, with the result that they had plotted the locations, which were in Yemen, way too far to the north. By shrinking Ptolemy's map southward to accommodate the desert, Gibson found that many of his locations suddenly fit. Makaraba therefore became what is today known as Al-Mahabisha. Do you see it there on the map?
Yeah.
Mahabisha is way down just on the border with Yemen and Arabia. Makaraba was not only an interior settlement of Arabia, but it turned out to be only a small hamlet situated in the Hadramaut area of Arabia, present-day Yemen, proving it was not Mecca after all. Completely wrong. So he pretty much shot Ptolemy's Makaraba out of the water, figuratively and literally speaking. So, what about the Qiblas? Now, this one you already know, so I'll go through this real quickly. Gibson went on and says there's a real problem with Mecca because look where all the Qiblas are facing. When you look at all the Qiblas, this is the direction of prayer for all the mosques. Now, these mosques were temples to begin with. They were Nabatean temples, but they were taken over and made into mosques after the 8th and 9th century. But when you look at all the Qiblas, and now remember, he went there physically to every one of these mosques. He went to over 100, and he found that they were all facing Petra up until 706. Up until 706, every mosque was facing Petra from as far away as Guangzhou, Canton, and also Sheraman. Now, he is starting to question the one in Guangzhou. So we may have to take Guangzhou out of there. But Sheraman in India, look at that. Way up in Bibi Samarkand, and Tariq Khana, which is in Iran. All of those are facing directly towards Petra.
Yeah, Dr. J, at this point in time, because we have just about 10 minutes before we wrap up the show based on your timing, I want to make sure that I don't overshoot the time that you've given to us. So we have just about 10 minutes. Probably we might just have to stop here for a while so that we can interact with the comments and the question of some of our audience right here and see if they have anything to say. I just want to be sure that I don't overshoot your time because you told me you told me so. All right, great. All right, great too. I'm going to bring us back to the slide, to the screen right now. And I want to say that I'm literally blown away by some of the things that you've shared. Of course, when you're talking about the Petra, you've talked about the Petra on the show before. And if the Muslim is willing to come on the show, then you know the person I'm talking about, Dr. Jane, was willing to come on the show to say, yes, Petra is actually the original Mecca. So what you're actually saying is right. He believes that. But then
right there, if Petra is the original Mecca, then that shuts down the standard Islamic narrative. He's going to have to throw away al-Bukhari. He's going to have to throw away all the hadith. He's going to have to throw away the Siddha, because the Siddha does not talk about Petra at all. The Siddha is very clear that all the civilizations leading up to Muhammad lived in Mecca. Is he willing to throw that all away? If so, then why even have Islam? Because Islam is absolutely dependent on Petra. Is absolutely dependent on Mecca, not Petra, on Mecca. And if he's going to already throw that out the window, I'd love to know how he's going to have a comeback on that.
All right, so let's say a couple of comments right here. So we see if we can have a question or something. Okay, so our dear brother Allah is saying first, yes, most of the time he's usually the first one to come on the show. And then we have Shalom from brother Michael. All right, so Derek is showing love to, just to express love for the program. And then we have comment from Mikhail. God bless you, Dr. J, and my Ninja brother. Okay, so Alaya is also saying, God bless you, brethren. I love your researches and effort to bring the truth out of life. Thank you. And then we also have Michelle again saying, God bless you all. And then we also have Chima Anaili is saying, God blessings. All right. Okay, so then we have Michelle coming back, say a well can never sustain a large city.
Okay, let me just jump on that. What is Michelle saying here? And this is a good point that Michelle's making. When you go to Mecca, they always say, well, yes, the Zamzam well is there. The problem is Zamzam well, we're going to destroy that one too. That's coming up yet. I haven't put that, so I can't really introduce it here. We're going to shut down the Zamzam well. We're going to shut down the Kaaba. We're going to shut down the Black Stone, and we're going to shut down Abraham's footprint. Abraham's
Wow.
well, Abraham's foot. All of these four major areas that are there in the Kaaba, we've already shut down Safa and Marwa. Those are the Safa is actually the Scopus in Jerusalem, and Marwa is Mount Moriah. It's a derivative of Mount Moriah, the two hills in Jerusalem that they went back and forth with. So all that is all being shut down. And what we're going to show you is that almost every one of these stages is from Jerusalem. But
Wow.
he's asking a good point. If you have one well, the Zamzam well, and the Muslims claim this goes all the way back to the time of Adam and Eve, how can one well accommodate all the caravans? It can't. And even that well is a new well, but I haven't really got into that. It's only, you can see, it's a brand new well. It has not been around for many hundreds of years. It didn't even exist in 1400 years ago. So this has been created from what we see up in Jerusalem. But that's for another time, another day. We'll get into all that material. But thanks, Michelle, for bringing that up.
All right. So, and then we also have Kofi saying right here, thanks, Dr. J. I believe he's talking about you. Thanks for the good work you're doing. So I've not really seen a question here. Okay. So Johnson Adelaide is asking the question, where is Petra located now?
Well, Petra is still in Petra. Petra is still there. You can go there. It's one of the most, probably one of the most famous touristic spots in the world today. It's in what is today Jordan. And it's just southeast of Jerusalem, about 100 miles southeast of Jerusalem, in the Wadi Petra. And it's where, if you just Google Petra on your computer, you will see it's the city which has all these beautiful tombs and temples carved out of sheer rock. So it's the city of tombs and temples carved out of sheer rock. One of the wonders, one of the man-made wonders of the world.
All right, so we have a question from Michelle again, or a kind of comment, observation. So said, lately I read on a Jewish website, the well of Aga is located close to Petra. So what's your comment on that, Dr. J?
True. Michelle, thanks for these comments, because you're bringing up some material that a lot of people probably would not have known about. When you look at the story of Hagar, now, according to the story of Hagar, she was thrown out by Abraham and she went out into the desert, which that whole area is desert up in Jordan. And then Abraham came to meet her, and he came around a wadi. He came around a cliff to meet her. Now, where are there cliffs in Mecca? There are no cliffs in Mecca. So if that were the case, Abraham would have had to gone 600 miles further south. How did Hagar go 600 miles from Abraham and go to the desert? What was she doing 600 miles away with a child in her hand? Remember, she had no provisions.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, she could not have gone 600 miles, survive. So the 600 miles, throw that out and just look at Petra, look at outside of Jerusalem. Between Jerusalem and Petra, you will find where Hagar went. So the well of Hagar is nothing more than something that has been created hundreds of years later. The well of Hagar is nothing more than a facsimile. But what we do know is that when Abraham went to meet her, she would have to been maybe 20, 30, or 40 miles away in order for him to go and meet her, in order for her to make it that far. A woman with a boy in a desert with no provisions would not be able to go much further than that. That is right outside of between Petra and Jerusalem. Now, are we saying that Abraham lived in Petra? No, I'm not saying that Abraham lived in Petra. And I don't think Dan Gibson's saying that at all. What we're saying is that Petra became the sanctuary for the Nabateans. This happened sometime after 70 AD. So this is much more recent. But almost everything that you're going to see in Petra, you can relocate even earlier in Jerusalem. So Petra is, remember when 70 AD, the temple was destroyed in Jerusalem? Yeah. Jews were thrown out of Jerusalem. They took their scrolls with them. They took their traditions with them, and they fled. And many of them fled to Petra. And they recreated what was already there in Jerusalem, like Safa and Marwa, which is Scopus, called Safa by Josephus. He refers it to as Safa, and Marwa is the Arabic equivalent to Moriah, which is where the Temple Mount is. The Kidron Valley is in between, and therefore they took those same two mountains and they reproduced them in Petra. So the Safa and Marwa are there in Petra, and you can see there is a temple on top of both of them to commemorate. So they started their tradition back down there. Now, when the Abbasids then took the sanctuary and they took the black stone and brought it down to Mecca, they reproduced that same thing. But what they did is there were no mountains there. They couldn't put mountains, so they put two rocks, which are still there today. They're only about 15 feet high. That does not constitute a mountain. And so they created these rocks to run back and forth with. They're still running back and forth. They're 15 feet high. A child could crawl up on top of them. And that's what she went to look for water. You don't go looking for water in two small little rocks that are only 15 feet high. They're only about 20 feet long. There's no way water's going to be there. In mountains, yes, but not in rocks. So even the facsimiles that we have today are laughing. They're laughable. They're just absolutely hopeless. What you want to say, facsimiles of what was the real Safa and Marwa, which are very much mountains in Jerusalem. So Petra comes between Jerusalem and Mecca. And this idea of Hagar, according to what Michelle is saying, is located much, much, much further north. I would suggest anywhere from 600 to 1,000 miles further north. Everything is located north.
All right. So we thank you for that answer, Dr. J. It's already 2 o'clock right here and should be 9 a.m. in the morning right there. So correct. I wouldn't want to take much of your time. Somebody is saying I watched a documentary. That's Truth Islam Apologetics says I watched a documentary of Zamzam. I was imagining it was new too. All right. So I think that was kind of comment in response to what you have said. And then also Michael is saying, glory to God, learning a whole lot. Can't wait for more. God bless you, Dr. J. Thank you very much for that, Michael. And then Michelle is saying, since Kadesh is identified with Rechem with Petra, can we identify Kadesh with Petra?
Rechem is another name for Petra. You're right.
Okay. All right. Great. So I think that is the last comment we're having here. And I think we can let go of Dr. J right now. First off, we want to thank you, Dr. J, for your time. I know you need to run off, but I want to appreciate you for your time, for the research. And it seems as if we're still going to be having part 4 of this, Dr. J.
We'll start next week right with the Qibla, and then we'll go straight on through. We'll just keep going until we finish this lecture.
Awesome. Thank you very much. So, Dr. J, yeah. All right. God bless you. Yes, we can let you go right now. All right. So, folks, thank you very much for staying till now. Really want to appreciate every one of you. We have to allow Dr. J go. But next week, Lord willing, just like we've just noted, next week we're going to be having part 4 of this series. All right, searching for the non-existent Muhammad. And right from part 1, it has really been very enlightening. We talked about the date right from the beginning and the record about Muhammad, talking about the date being too late. And then we looked at the revisionist last week, looked at the past the revisionist, the last one, the past and also the present. And today we're looking at Mecca right from, the 4th century, okay? And then we're going way back before Islam started to see if Mecca existed or not. I know a lot of you have gotten massive information and you're processing some of those information in your head. Some of them are new to you and you're imagining, really, can this be true? But then that's actually what we're taking a look at. Now, for my Muslim friends who are wondering, hey, Korede and Dr. J, are you guys making stuff up? But the truth of the matter is that you can see how Dr. J is taking this step by step, going by the map and also going through history. So you can see that it's not just saying that something is true or not true, but we're looking at it with the evidences as well. So I'm so glad about this. Next week, we're going to be talking about Petra, yeah? And that's what Dr. J was about talking about before he had to go, because I don't want to keep him waiting for now. So please, I want you to stick with us. Next week, we're going to be talking about the part 4 of this particular topic of discussion. And if you have questions concerning this particular topic, please write them down. When Dr. J comes next week, we are going to be talking about them. Also, I want you to know that we are social. You can actually reach out to us on our social media platform. You can reach out to us on Facebook, on Instagram, and also on YouTube. All right. So I just want to show you a couple of our social media platforms. The one you can actually reach out with. You can reach us on Facebook, and that is at Seasoned Apologist on Facebook. And also you can reach out to us on Instagram, and that is at Seasoned Apologist. Also the same on Twitter. You can reach out to us on Twitter, and that is at Seasoned A. All right. So that is at Seasoned A. And also you can reach out to us on YouTube, and that is S Apologist on YouTube. If you want to send out a message to us on WhatsApp, you can also reach out to us on WhatsApp with the number you're seeing right there. If you're sending a message, you're trying to reach us out of Nigeria, you have to add the code, that's +23481 27999591. Want to send us an email? You can do that at info@seasonedapologist.com. Again, that is info@seasonedapologist.com. If you want to reach out to us on our website, want to see what we have there, you can also check out our website, www.seasonedapologist.com. So those are the ways you can reach out to us. And also you can also join us on Patreon. We're also on Patreon. If you want to support what we're doing, want to lend a supporting hand in whichever way that you can. You can also send your support actually via Patreon. All right, so that is all that we can have for today. Next week, Lord willing, we're going to be having Dr. J right here, and we're going to be continuing on the topic, the not searching for the non-existent Muhammad. Okay, searching for the non-existent Muhammad. And my name is Romain Corridor. If you have not subscribed to this channel, all right, make sure that you do. Sometimes I get information from people, hey, we don't get a notification when the program is coming up and all that. If you're subscribed to the channel, you'll be able to know when we're coming online, because we usually post notifications, updates of program that are coming. Also, make sure you follow us on all these social media platforms so you can get some update from us. And also, we noticed that most of the people that are watching our show are not subscribed to the channel. Is that not wonderful? YouTube metrics, all right, analytics says that 99% of people that are watching the videos or watching programs on Seasoned Apologists are not subscribed. All right, so please make sure that you subscribe to this channel so you can get more information. Again, my name is Corey Delawine. God bless you. I want to say thank you to everyone who's been on the show. Thank you for your comments. Really appreciate you, and God bless you. All right, so again, we're going to see you next week. So make sure you stay safe, and the Lord's grace and mercy be with you. Bye for now.
We love you, Lord, we love you. Father, we give you all the glory. You are my rock, my strength, and my trust. In you I live and move and have my being. You are my shelter, my peace, and my shield. You are my everything. You are worthy to be praised. You are my rock, my strength, and my trust. In you I live and move and have my being. You are my shelter, my peace, and my shield. You are my